Hello, I'm Kitty, and I'm going to be joined in just a second by Dave Bell, who is the Principal Advisor on Health, Wellbeing and the Environment at Natural England. And we're going to be taking a closer look at just how we relate to the natural world, generally and in a year of pandemic. So I'd like to welcome in Dave Bell.
Hello, hi Kitty, hi everybody.
Hi Dave, hi, nice to see you. How are you doing?
It's good, thank you. Yes, have a nice time up here in Derbyshire. Sun's been shining for the past few days, so yeah, we're all feeling a bit more positive about that, aren't we? Yes.
Yeah, and so your role is within the People and Nature programme at Natural England. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, so Natural England's I suppose primary goal is creating thriving nature for people and the planet, and the People and Nature programme really looks at how we improve nature for nature's sake, but also for people and the benefits that people get from nature. We've got a big focus on trying to engage more people in the natural environment and nature, whether that's from their homes, in their gardens, or connecting with our amazing sort of protected landscapes. For the health and environment, or the health benefits that provides to people, but also making that next step for more people being connected with nature and taking sort of positive decisions to support nature and improve the natural environment.
Fantastic, and it's definitely something that we've all had our own interaction with in our own ways over the last year. And I'm interested in talking a bit about the impact of the pandemic on our connectedness with the natural world. And we've had many restrictions on our normal family lives, normal working lives, and it's worth saying that lockdown measures have obviously impacted disproportionately some communities over others, which is something we'll hopefully come back to in a little while. But what have been the broader trends we've seen when it comes to our general relationship with nature over the last year?
Yeah, it's a good question, probably quite a complex one. I think in terms of basic time that people are spending outside in nature and the role that local sort of green spaces and natural spaces are playing, it's really just risen in people's consciousness. I mean, our People and Nature survey shown that over half the population are spending more time in nature or in green spaces and blue spaces than they were before the pandemic. And actually, there's a really strong link, or people recognizing the value for their physical health, but also their mental health. And a recent RSPB and YouGov poll sort of really focused in on that as well, and showed that there's a big public mandate, if you want, for the government to invest more in accessible nature-rich places for everybody across the UK.
So there's been kind of a general increase on value that we place on nature, and I wonder if that's going to stick, or if that's going to be just something we've just seen throughout the last year, and then we'll get back to our busy, blinkered 21st century living. And do you think it's going to be a general lifestyle shift that will endure?
I mean, the optimist in me says yes. I hope so. Maybe the realist says that if we don't do something more to try and lock in those changes, sorry, bad choice of words, but if we don't try, help people to make that part of their everyday life, through joining up our, policy and delivery across multiple areas of our work, not just the natural environment, but also transport, planning, legislation, other elements of our, of how we live as a society, really. I think then there's a risk that we do go back, and there's also a risk that we sort of perpetuate or even increase the inequalities in terms of access for those that have and those that don't, and how that actually correlates to those with the least good quality access, or also those that are struggling in other ways around health inequalities, lower income, lower education, those from BAME backgrounds. So it's about how do we capitalize on, I suppose, the small positive that we've seen in the past year of more people valuing nature close by them, without repeating maybe some of the errors of the past in terms of not providing equitable access.
Yeah, and I think the fact that there is probably, well, evidently from the stuff you've just said, there's a massive increase on demand of natural spaces. I mean, these parks that even the smallest of little corner parks with a bench or a little walk, they've become places where we've all had to go to meet friends and family over the last year. They're not just a sole, thing. They've facilitated socialization, and they all seem to have kind of sentimental value for us all as well now, which hopefully that demand will kind of push forward. And yeah, it's interesting to think about how this new kind of value placed on nature could give way to long-term changes when it comes to nature's recovery as well. And maybe, we saw clips on the news of nature kind of encroaching into cities over pandemic because there weren't as many people about. I mean, that might be one thing that's probably going to be a pandemic only trend, I guess. Like, the goats in Wales. I was going to say those
goats. Yeah. I think you're right. I think maybe we won't have goats walking down every high street, but I think how do we create really high quality biodiverse spaces in our towns and cities? Because we know there's a lot of evidence that points towards the more variable a green space is, the more biodiverse, the more interest there is, then the bigger health and well-being benefits you receive sort of being in those spaces and actually connecting with nature. And there's quite a big thing about the word connecting, actually, in terms of how we connect to nature, and that being the key thing in actually our health and well-being. So it's not necessarily just time spent in nature; it's connecting with nature. So that has implications. If people struggle to get out, for instance, you can connect with nature from your house through sort of plants or window boxes and other types of sort of activities. So I think the idea that sort of nature is sort of out there, and we need to get more people, into the national parks, or improve access to natural parks, which is a key part of it. But it's actually, how do we bring nature in close to where people live and the value that they see in those spaces, and then how do you use those local spaces as a stepping stone for, I suppose, nature just being part of higher up in the decision making processes for across society.
Yeah, and we know that going out for, even the briefest of walks, or visiting a local park or something, and all of those things are good for our physical health. But what is it about doing those things that is also beneficial for our mental health and well-being as well?
Yeah, well, I think that's where really, I suppose, connected with nature and natural spaces, green spaces, blue spaces, really sort of comes into its own of the real positives that you get for your mental health and well-being, and there's a number of parts to that. I think regularly spending time in nature, regularly connected with nature, is just one of the best ways that you can sort of do a bit of an MOT on your own mental health and well-being. But then we also know that through practices such as social prescribing and green social prescribing, people with sort of lower level mental illness, mental health conditions, anxiety, etc., they get real benefits from a structured program around time in nature. So that might be engaging in some practical conservation, that might be sort of community allotment activity, or it might be things like mindfulness activities in nature. So again, it's not reliant on having to be really physically active to get those mental health benefits.
It feels as well like we're constantly learning about the relationship that our brains have with nature, and the messages that it can be affected by being out in green spaces, and how that can affect our own mental health issues like anxiety, depression, and things like that. So it seems like a developing area of study as well, which is really exciting. But it's worth saying again that not everyone has a garden, and not everyone has access to a safe and good quality green space near where they live. What needs to change with regards to making sure that nature is there and accessible for everyone, no matter where they live?
Yes, it's a great question, and I think there's a number of different layers to a response to that. I think, as I touched on earlier, around integrating our sort of policy and legislation and sort of metrics and data at that high level, at the sort of cross-government level. So looking at our priorities in Natural England and DEFRA around improving the environment, people's connection with the environment. So we've got the 25-year Environment Bill, you've got sort of the UK Nature Strategy and the 25-year Environment Plan sort of in that area. But if that's not talking to, the transport plans and investment around active and green transport routes, if that's not talking to the Ministry of Housing, Communities, Local Government around their plans around planning reforms and community sort of engagement, and that element I think that we have seen in COVID is more people wanting to get engaged in their local communities and support their local communities. So there's something there that we need to connect and show the role of nature as a way of bringing people together around that. And then, my area that I'm working on around health. So looking at changes in the NHS and the health system, and looking at integrated care systems in the NHS, and how will that have an impact on how nature is viewed through the health system, the role that it plays in terms of green social prescribing that I mentioned. So and I haven't even talked about climate change and everything going on there. So it's a big meshing together across government and across sectors really, and understanding what drives decision making in those sectors. So I when I first joined Natural England, I worked a lot in Greater Manchester and looked at the Natural Capital Plan. Was working on the Natural Capital Plan for Greater Manchester. We were talking around, as a initially as a sort of an environmental sector. Look at right. So this is a natural capital and ecosystem services, benefits, and this is the amount it will save for the NHS. And then we talk to those people actually taking decisions in the NHS, and they're saying, well, we need to look at actually how does that impact on waiting times? How does it impact on quality of life, quality of adjusted life years? So that's how long people live without needing regular intervention medically. So it's actually, are we talking the right language when we talk about the benefits that nature provides? So I think that's one challenge of joining up. And the other thing I think is really important is around diversity and representation in our in how projects are managed and governance. So do we have people, we know that there are underrepresented groups often have the least access to good quality nature. Are we sitting in one room designing something that will have no relevance to them? So how do we bring sort of communities in on those decision-making processes? I think my favourite phrase I think from the design industry is around what gets designed depends on who's in the room. I think we need to think about that, how we're taking decisions, how we're designing interventions.
Yeah, putting a diverse range of people in the room in the beginning, for sure. And it's been interesting seeing certain projects pop up in the last year. I'm thinking of ones like Black Girls Hike, which tackles the lack of inclusion and representation of Black women in the outdoors. And these, it's interesting to know how much of it, when it comes to engaging a diverse group of people, how much is about funding, providing green spaces in areas of, high deprivation, and how much of it is about representation. For example, having a range of faces, bodies, abilities, backgrounds in the media, for example, and in projects and organisations like Natural England. It seems to be a balance of those things, of funding, but also strategy.
Yes, I'd agree. Yes, and I think the two are probably connected in some way as well.
Yeah.
I think it's something that as an organisation we recognise that we need to do more on that in terms of our workforce, and we've been looking at the past year and a half really sort of at how we can improve that diversity within Natural England, as well as equipping our staff that work in area teams. So we have a number of area teams that work sort of across the country, and developing sort of an inclusion toolkit and so that they're much better equipped in terms of engaging locally. There's also something about recognising, as an organisation, we don't always have to be the experts, but we need to be able to help to either target funding or support those people that are already really good at engaging locally with their communities or with other communities. And it might not be around sort of natural environment work, but actually how can we bring the natural environment to them and show them the benefits, and then work together with them, building new and diverse partnerships for nature's recovery and for engaging more people with nature for the health and well-being benefits that will provide.
And with Natural England also, they do a lot of managing of sites themselves, don't you? And I guess this year, because we've all unlocked in us a higher value on nature, but also the fact that we're probably all going to be, or most of us are going to be holidaying, if we are holidaying in the UK, and maybe there's going to be people doing things that they might not have, previously considered, like camping trips or visiting areas of the UK that they might not have been before. So how does that impact, do you think, the areas of the countryside in the UK that are going to have an influx of people potentially? Do you think our protected nature reserves and special, sites of special scientific interest, can they handle the weight of many more visitors, or do they need more money and more work put into supporting them and to encourage that kind of local holiday culture?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think more investment is always going to be welcome and is always going to help. The other part, I suppose, is creating more of those spaces so that people, closer to towns and cities, so you don't have the sort of the honeypot sites. But also, I think we've worked hard, really hard, over the past year or so for the national nature reserves that we manage and the sort of national nature reserve partnerships, so that there's better signage, there's really good communication around what how to move around the site, activities that support the site and may damage the site. We've also relaunched the Countryside Code earlier this year, and there's going to be more and more work going into that, really around how we communicate, how to respect the outdoors, but also so everyone can have those benefits that it provides.
Yeah, so that'll be things like, how to move through a nature reserve safely and make sure you're not disturbing things and not picking things or leaving things behind you and stuff like that.
Yes, yes, right. I think it's also around. I think I'm really interested in how we create sort of a long-lasting relationship with nature. I think going back to where we started the conversation around, if we can help people to connect to nature in these spaces, and then that will hopefully embed in their sort of consciousness and activities. And there are studies that show correlation between a stronger connection with nature and pro-environmental behaviours, sort of not just around sort of protected sites and green spaces, but also around things like recycling and that sort of wider pro-environmental behaviours, which I think is a good thing to focus on as we head towards COP26 and obviously the G7 going on this week. So there's a lot. It's a lot of engagement, and that does take time, and it does take resources, and it takes lots of passionate people on the ground. So that's what we'll be focusing on.
Yeah, no, that's really great, and it's definitely interesting because you can talk about the theories behind everything and the infrastructure's needed and the money needed and all that, but actually what I'm talking to you, it's really flagged that up as what it comes down to a lot of the time is our own very personal emotions and feelings towards the world around us, and building up any kind of sentimentality or nostalgia or relationship with gardens, parks, verges, anything like that you see change throughout the year. Those are things that we've all had in the last year. I think there's been a certain element of slowing down and realizing that the seasons bring different things, and some people have noticed that for the first time this year, and that is just going to embed a rich kind of reliance and interdependence on nature. I think that's going to help us all. But thank you so much for chatting to us. It's been really, really interesting, and we're going to have to wrap up our conversation now. But there's going to be something else about the People in Nature programme tomorrow, I think, for the Festival of Nature.
Yes, there is. Yes, so our director for the People in Nature programme, I think, has done a video around the sort of whole remit of the People in Nature programme, not just the health and wellbeing side of it. So that should be on tomorrow. I'm not sure exactly the time of that, I'm afraid, but have a look. I'm sure it'll be on your.
It'll be on it'll be on all the social medias and websites tomorrow. So that's wonderful. And for anyone watching, do keep an eye on the jam-packed activities going on and the Festival of Nature. There's a couple of days left, but that you can catch up on all of the films and workshops and talks and things like that on YouTube and on the website. So thanks so much, Dave. It's been really, really fascinating chatting to you.
That's a pleasure. Thanks, Kitty. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.